Hi, everyone. I hope that you're well. I am going to be sharing my thoughts on the solution focused brief therapy and the narrative therapy. So, both of these, according to Corey, are postmodern approaches, which basically means that clients tell stories about themselves. And in these stories, they're sharing. About their life, and there are narratives that repeat themselves, and these narratives reveal truth about that client. And in these approaches, truth is basically subjective. It is what the client has experienced, and based on their interaction in society and the relationships. Um, and so, also, the therapeutic relationship is key and pivotal, both of these approaches. The client is considered the expert, and whereas the counselor is considered, takes a position of not knowing. And that just means that they are intently listening and allowing and supporting clients in retelling their stories in order to frame new meaning and new narratives. So these approaches are both optimistic, they're a strength based approach. You will hear the terms resiliency brought over and over again, especially with the solution focused approach. And uh, they're both very empowering. Um, both of these theories are not so much into diagnosing or categorizing someone in a diagnosis. Um, they do uh, differ in one capacity, is that the narrative approach, it does focus on past or previous problems and how they impact the current problematic situation, whereas the solution focus does not necessarily focus on problems, and it is looking for just possibilities. Um, and so compatible or incompatible with biblical truths. Um, we see that when truth is subjective based on the individual, if their truth is not aligned with biblical truths, we know that it is not congruent or compatible with um, Christianity. Also, we know that, and we've mentioned this a lot before in other theories, and how theories have understanding that the humans are good. We know that as Christians, that sin and the part that sin plays on human nature, and no one is righteous, no, not one. And these approaches limit the impact that sin can have on someone's life. However, in these approaches, it does talk about reframing and the client beginning a new narrative, and it does align with biblical principles when we reframe our identity and who we are based upon God. It does create change in our outlook on life. Um, and the biblical aspects, I did find support in the Simmons textbook. So creating measurable outcomes, basically, these approaches are limited in the fact that if an individual requires or needs a therapist or counselor that is more directive, or is seen as a problem solver, or they may want to see the therapist as the expert rather than themselves, then its effectiveness will be limited. Also, when I was reading the Simmons textbooks, it talks about that if the therapist or counselor is not skilled in the areas of questioning and deconstructing narratives, and finding and pointing out resiliencies and strengths within the client, then again, this would be ineffective. And lastly, A mark that this could be ineffective is if the roles of the client and the counselor are not specifically shared in the beginning. In the Then this approach would be limited in its effectiveness. If the behavior is not or the goals are not selected or collaborated upon with both the client and the counselor, and they're SMART goals, meaning that they're measurable, then again, this approach could be um, will be limited in its effectiveness. So I appreciate your time and thank you for listening. And